She straightened and looked down at the hierarch with eyes that burned with something ancient and terrible. You showed us what the universe was really like. You showed us that there were beings out there who would destroy us without hesitation or mercy. And in doing so, you united us. You gave us a common enemy. You gave us a purpose. She gestured to the darkness outside the station windows, where the block stars cast no light. So thank you, Hierarch. Thank you for attacking our world. Thank you for killing our people. Thank you for making us what we are. Without you, we might have stayed asleep forever. The Hierarch said nothing. What could it say? It had come to this conference hoping to understand its defeat, and now it understood all too well. The treaty was signed within the hour. The Vethkai, Dominion, accepted total surrender. Their fleets were dismantled. Their weapons were destroyed. Their territories were divided among the Concordat species. The war that had lasted 3,000 years was finally over, but the stars remained dark when the Concordat Council petitioned to restore light to the blocked systems. The human government refused. The stellar shades would stay in place for 100 years, they announced. 1 year for every million humans who died in the first attack. A monument to what humanity had lost, and a reminder to the galaxy of what they had gained. Some species called it vindictive. Others called it unnecessary, but no one called it surprising. They had learned by now that humans did nothing by half measures. The Allery ambassador filed her final report on the human species after the war ended. It was read by every government in the Concordat and would be studied for generations to come. We were wrong about them. She wrote, "From the beginning, we were wrong. We looked at their short lives and saw weakness. We looked at their divisions and saw chaos. We looked at their emotions and saw liability. But we did not understand what we were seeing. Their short lives do not make them cautious. They make them urgent. Humans do not have time to waste, so they do not waste it. Their divisions taught them to fight, to struggle, to compete. They have been at war with each other since their species began, and that constant conflict made them strong. Their emotions are not weakness, but fuel. They feel things more intensely than any species we have encountered, and they use those feelings to drive themselves beyond what should be possible. We thought we were protecting children when we quarantined their world. We thought we were shielding innocents from the horrors of war. But we were not protecting children. We were caging a predator. And when that cage was broken, the predator was very, very hungry. She ended her report with a single recommendation that would become policy throughout the Concordat. Under no circumstances should any species provoke the humans. Do not threaten them. Do not harm them. Do not give them a reason to remember their rage. They have proven that they are capable of anything when properly motivated. Let us ensure that we never motivate them against ourselves. The recommendation was accepted unanimously. The war was over. The Vethkai were broken. The Concordat was victorious. And humanity had earned their place among the stars, through blood and fire and darkness. But the galaxy would never forget the lesson they had learned. The lesson that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not the oldest or the strongest or the most advanced. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one with nothing to lose and everything to prove. The one who has been underestimated and dismissed and forgotten. The one who is told they did not matter, because when that enemy finally rises, when they finally show the universe what they truly are, nothing can stand against them. The stars remain dark across the contested sectors, silent monuments to humanity's entrance into galactic history. Travelers who passed through those regions would look out at the void where light should have been and remember the species that had blocked out the very suns, and they would shiver, not from cold, but from the knowledge of what humanity had done and the understanding that they could do it again if they ever needed to. The humans had joined the war as primitives, as children, as beings too weak to matter. They had ended it as conquerors. And the galaxy would remember that for as long as the stars themselves endured, whether those stars shone bright or sat in darkness. The great hall of the Galactic Concord stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal and living metal, and within its gleaming walls the rulers of 1,000 star systems had gathered to hear the final verdict. On yet another primitive world, Ambassador Valith of the Ascended Kethrani moved to the central platform with the confidence of a predator who had never known defeat. Her iridescent scales catching the light of 3 artificial suns that hung suspended in the ceiling above. And when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 10,000 years of galactic dominance. The world designated Sol 3, locally known as Earth, has completed its evaluation period, she announced to the assembled representatives. And I am pleased to deliver our official classification. The Council of 12 leaned forward in their hovering thrones, though none of them expected any surprises, for they had seen this process unfold countless times across the millennia, and the outcome was always the same. Class 7, Valith declared with a thin smile that revealed rows of needle-sharp teeth. Pre-enlightened, tribal, primitive. A ripple of amusement passed through the assembly, and several delegates made sounds that served as laughter among their species. For Class 7 was among the lowest designations possible, reserved for species barely capable of leaving their own atmosphere. The holographic display behind Valith flickered to life, showing a blue and green world spinning slowly in the darkness of space. And she gestured toward it with one clawed hand as she continued her presentation. These creatures call themselves humans, and they present a rather sad picture of evolutionary potential gone wrong, she explained, her tone dripping with condescension. They possess no faster-than-light travel, no unified planetary government, no psychic abilities, and no genetic modifications of any kind. She waved her hand, and the display changed to show images of human cities, vehicles, and technology that drew more sounds of amusement from the crowd. They still burn hydrocarbons for energy, a practice our ancestors abandoned over 50,000 years ago, Valith continued. They war constantly among themselves over invisible lines drawn in dirt, over differences in skin pigmentation, over which invisible deity they choose to worship. The Concord's Minister of Acquisitions, a massive creature resembling a floating jellyfish made of pure energy, pulsed with interest and asked the question that was on everyone's mind. What of their military capabilities, Ambassador? Should we expect any resistance to integration? Valith's laugh echoed through the hall like breaking glass, and she shook her head with genuine amusement at the very notion. Their most advanced weapons are nuclear devices. Minister, crude splitting of atoms that our shields can deflect without effort, she replied. Their fastest vehicles cannot even approach 1% of light speed, and their soldiers still carry projectile weapons that fire small pieces of metal. She paused for effect, letting the absurdity of it sink in before delivering her conclusion. They are, in short, utterly harmless. The council deliberated for less than 5 minutes before reaching their unanimous decision, and the chief arbiter rose to deliver the verdict that would seal Earth's fate. The world Sol 3 is hereby designated a harvestable world under Concord law, he announced, in a voice that had condemned 10,000 civilizations before this one. Its resources shall be extracted for the benefit of member species, and its population shall be relocated to labor colonies, where they may serve a useful purpose. Valith bowed her head in acknowledgement, already calculating the profits this new acquisition would bring to her people. For Earth was rich in metals and water, and the humans themselves would make adequate workers once they were properly broken. The integration fleet shall depart within 3 cycles. The chief arbiter continued. May this primitive species come to appreciate the gift of purpose we bestow upon them. And so it was decided, with no more thought than one might give to stepping on an insect. And the greatest mistake in galactic history was set into motion 3 weeks later. The Kethrani fleet materialized in the skies above Earth like metal gods descending from heaven. And the humans looked up in wonder and terror at ships that stretched for miles across their blue sky in New York and Beijing and Moscow and Lagos and 100 other cities. People stopped in the streets and pointed at the massive vessels that blotted out the sun. And for one brief moment, the entire human race shared a single thought: we are not alone. The Kethrani broadcast their message in every human language simultaneously, their translation algorithms having easily decoded the primitive communication systems of Earth. And the words fell upon 7 billion ears like a death sentence. People of Earth, you have been claimed by the Galactic Concord, the message declared. Resistance is not only futile, but illogical. For we possess technology beyond your comprehension and military power beyond your imagination. And therefore, you will surrender your governments, your resources, and your freedom immediately. The message repeated 3 times. And then the Kethrani waited for the response they had received from countless worlds before this one. The inevitable acceptance of defeat that always came when primitive species recognized their own helplessness in the command ship hovering above the Atlantic Ocean. High Commander Zorath drummed his clawed fingers against his throne and watched the sensor displays with growing impatience. For the humans should have responded by now. Perhaps their communication systems are too primitive to reach us, suggested one of his officers. Shall I send landing parties to deliver our terms in person? Zorath was about to agree when a new signal appeared on the displays. And every officer on the bridge turned to watch as a single transmission began broadcasting from somewhere on the surface below it. Came from a building the humans called the United Nations, and it carried the combined authority of every government on Earth. And it consisted of just one word repeated in every human language. No. Zorath stared at the display in confusion, uncertain if his translators were malfunctioning. For no species had ever refused the Concord's demands. Not once in 10,000 years of galactic expansion. No? He repeated, as if saying it aloud might help him understand. What do they mean, though? Before anyone could answer, the sensors began screaming warnings as thousands of primitive projectiles rose from the surface below. Crude missiles tipped with nuclear warheads that had no chance of penetrating Kethrani shields. And yet the humans fired them anyways. Zorath watched in bewilderment as his ship swatted the missiles from the sky like insects. And he felt something he had never experienced in 300 years of military service: doubt. For a species that had no hope of victory had just chosen war. And in that moment Zorath began to suspect that the Concord had made a terrible miscalculation. The humans were not surrendering. They were not begging for mercy. They were fighting. Back in somewhere deep in his ancient warrior's instincts, Zorath felt the first cold touch of fear. 3 months had passed since the invasion began, and High Commander Zorath stood in the smoking ruins of what had once been his forward command base, watching another supply convoy burn on the distant horizon while the acrid smell of defeat filled his nostrils. Had conquered 19 worlds before this one, and on each of those worlds the fighting had lasted days at most. For primitive species always broke quickly once they understood the hopelessness of their situation. But these humans seemed incapable of understanding anything at all. Report, he growled at his adjutant. Though he already knew the news would be bad, because the news was always bad now. We lost contact with the 3rd Armored Division 6 hours ago, the adjutant replied with trembling voice. Satellite imagery shows their vehicles scattered across a mountain pass, all of them destroyed by explosive devices buried in the road. Zorath closed his 4 eyes and tried to control the rage building in his chest. For this was the 7th Division he had lost to such cowardly tactics. and his forces were bleeding out across a planet that should have fallen in a single day. How? He demanded. How do they keep finding our convoys? How do they know where we will be before we arrive? No one had an answer, because no one could explain how a species without faster-than-light communication could coordinate attacks across an entire continent, or how soldiers with primitive rifles could destroy armored vehicles worth more than their entire civilization. The truth was something the Kethrani were only beginning to understand, and it was a truth that would haunt their species for generations to come. Humans fought wrong. They did not form battle lines like civilized species. They did not challenge the Kethrani to honorable combat, and they did not follow any rules of warfare that the Concord recognized. For they had invented their own rules across 10,000 years of killing each other. They hid in forests and mountains and ruined cities, emerging only to strike before vanishing like ghosts into terrain they knew better than any alien ever could. And they turned every building and bridge and tunnel into a potential death trap. Zorath had lost more soldiers to explosive devices hidden in children's toys than he had lost in actual combat. And the psychological effect on his troops was devastating. For warriors who had never known fear now jumped at shadows and refused to enter buildings without bombardment first. But the worst part, the thing that kept Zorath awake during the long nights, was how quickly the humans learned. His science officers had delivered their report with shaking hands just last week, explaining something that should have been impossible according to everything the Concord knew about primitive species. They are reverse engineering our technology, the chief scientist had said, his voice barely a whisper. Within 3 weeks of the invasion, they had captured enough equipment to understand our shield generators. And within 6 weeks, they were manufacturing their own versions. Zorath had demanded to see proof, and the scientist had shown him footage of human soldiers carrying crude but functional energy shields into battle. Shields that could stop Kethrani plasma weapons long enough for the humans to close the distance and fight hand-to-hand. This is impossible, Zorath had said. Our species required 800 years to develop shield technology after we discovered the underlying principles. Their individual lifespans are very short, the scientist had replied. Perhaps no more than a century if they are fortunate. And we theorize that this has forced them to evolve an accelerated learning capability, for they cannot afford to spend generations mastering new concepts. The scientist had paused then, his scales pale with what Zorath now recognized as fear. Commander, I have studied the records of their world, and I must tell you something, he had said. The planet Earth is what our ancient texts call a death world. A place where the environment itself is hostile to intelligent life. Zorath had heard legends of such places, but had never believed they truly existed. For what species could evolve on a world that actively tried to kill them? Their planet experiences extreme temperature variations, violent weather events, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and is filled with predatory and parasitic life forms. The scientist had continued. The humans did not evolve in safety and peace like the Concord species. They evolved fighting for survival every single day. Now, standing in the ruins of his command base while human guerrillas celebrated another victory somewhere in the hills, Zorath finally understood what the scientist had been trying to tell him. Humans were not a civilized species that had abandoned violence. They were predators who had been sharpening their claws against each other for thousands of years. And now, for the first time in their history, they had found an enemy they could all hate. Together, every nation on Earth had stopped fighting its neighbors, and ancient enemies now stood shoulder to shoulder against the common threat, sharing weapons and tactics and intelligence in ways they never had before. The Americans shared satellite data with the Russians. The Indians coordinated with the Pakistanis. The Israelis planned operations with nations that had sworn to destroy them just months ago. and all of them directed their combined fury at the Kethran received a communication from the homeworld that evening, demanding an explanation for the campaign's failure. And he spent 3 hours trying to explain something he barely understood himself. They are not like other primitives, he said finally. They do not break, they do not surrender, and they do not stop fighting even when victory is impossible. He paused, searching for words that could convey the horror of what he had witnessed. Every time we kill 10 of them, 100 more appear, he continued. Every time we destroy a city, they fight from the rubble. And when we take their weapons, they build new ones from scrap metal and anger. The silence from the homeworld stretched for a long moment before the reply came. You have unlimited resources at your disposal. Commander, the voice said coldly. Use them, break these primitives, and restore honor to the Kethrani name. Zorath acknowledged the order and ended the communication. But as he looked out at the burning horizon and listened to the distant sounds of human celebrations, he felt something he had never experienced in 3 centuries of warfare. He felt like prey and somewhere in the darkness. The humans were planning their next move, learning from every battle and growing stronger with each passing day. And Zorath understood with terrible clarity that the Concord had awakened something it could not put back to sleep. The primitives were no longer being invaded, they were being educated, and when their education was complete, they would become the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever known. The first refugee ships from the Earth campaign arrived at Concord Central with their holds full of broken soldiers, and the citizens of 1,000 worlds watched in stunned silence as warriors who had never known defeat stumbled down the boarding ramps. With hollow eyes and trembling hands, Ambassador Valith observed the arrivals from her private viewing chamber, her scales pale with an emotion she refused to name. For these were Kethrani elite soldiers who had conquered empires. And now they flinched at loud noises and woke screaming from nightmares they could not describe. What happened to them? Whispered her aide, a young Kethrani who had never seen combat and could not understand what force could reduce such mighty warriors to such pitiful states. Valith did not answer, for she had read the classified reports and she knew exactly what had happened. Though she could barely believe it herself, the humans had happened. She watched the tribunal broadcasts with growing dread as survivor after survivor took the stand to describe horrors that defied explanation. And each testimony painted a picture of a species that simply refused to accept the reality of their own defeat. We killed 10 of them and 100 more came, one soldier testified, his voice cracking with trauma. We destroyed their tanks, and they attacked us with vehicles covered in metal plates and explosives, driving straight into our formations and detonating themselves. Another survivor described how the humans had learned to jam Kethrani communications within weeks of the invasion, cutting off units from their commanders and hunting them down in the chaos that followed. They fought in the darkness, he said, staring at something only he could see. Our species gave up night vision 10,000 years ago because we had technology to light our way. But the humans remembered how to hunt in the dark, and they came for us while we slept. The most disturbing testimony came from a science officer who had been captured and released, sent back to the Concord with a message carved into his scales in the human language. They wanted me to tell you something, he said, reading from the scars on his own body. They said, we remember everything, we forgive nothing, and we are coming. Valith demanded reinforcements from the council, arguing that the humans were a greater threat than anyone had anticipated, and the council granted her request, sending fleet after fleet to the distant blue world that had become a graveyard for Kethrani ambition. It was not enough. Each new fleet found the situation worse than the last. For the humans were not merely surviving anymore. They were adapting and evolving and growing stronger with every passing day. They had captured enough Kethrani technology to understand how it worked. and their scientists were working around the clock to replicate and improve upon alien designs, driven by a desperation that made them capable of miracles in secret laboratories hidden beneath mountains and in bunkers buried deep underground. Humanity's greatest minds were solving problems that should have taken centuries, fueled by coffee and spite and an absolute refusal to accept extinction. Kathrani intercepted communications that spoke of something called Project Phoenix, but they could not decode the details. And by the time they understood what the humans were building, it was already too late on the 1-year anniversary of the invasion. Humanity unveiled their answer to the Concorde's aggression. It rose from a hidden facility in the Swiss Alps, a ship unlike anything the humans had ever built before. Constructed from salvaged Kathrani components and human engineering, and held together by nothing more than determination and hope. It was ugly and asymmetrical, and covered in improvised armor plating. And its engines burned with a light that should not have existed according to everything the humans knew about physics. It was a faster-than-light drive, the first human FTL drive, built in a single year by a species that had been burning coal just 2 centuries ago. And it worked because the humans had decided it would work and refused to accept any other outcome. High Commander Zorath received the report while planning yet another failed offensive, and he read it 3 times before the words finally made sense. "They have FTL capability," he said, his voice flat with disbelief. The primitives built their own jump drive. His officers stared at him in shock, for this was impossible. This violated everything the Concorde understood about technological development. And yet the evidence was undeniable. A human ship had just appeared in orbit around a Kathrani colony world, broadcasting a message that would change the course of galactic history. The message showed a human female in military uniform, her face scarred by battle and her eyes burning with cold fury. And she spoke in perfect Kathrani that she had learned specifically for this moment. "Concorde forces. This is Admiral Chunwei of the United Earth Defense Fleet," she said. "1 year ago, you came to our world and demanded our surrender, and we told you no." She paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "You called us primitive because we had not conquered the stars. But we have corrected that deficiency, and now we bring you a message from the people of Earth." The camera pulled back to reveal the ship behind her, a vessel bristling with weapons that combined human nuclear technology with captured Kathrani systems. A hybrid of 2 civilizations built for one purpose. "You came to our home," Admiral Chenwei said, her voice like ice. "Now we are coming to yours. And we will not stop until every species you have enslaved is free." She smiled then, a predator's smile that showed her teeth. "You wanted to know what primitives can do? Watch and learn." The transmission ended, and across the Concorde worlds there was only silence. The silence of an empire that had just realized it was no longer the hunter. The humans were coming, and they were bringing their wrath with them. The archives of the Galactic Concorde contained records stretching back 10,000 years, documenting the conquest and integration of countless species across 1,000,000 star systems. And in all those records, not one conquered species had ever struck back at their masters. The humans became the first. The human fleet was small by Concorde standards. Barely 24 ships built from salvaged technology and held together by welded steel and stubborn hope. But they fought with a ferocity that made the mightiest Concorde admirals tremble. They came out of nowhere, appearing from jump space without warning and striking at military installations and slave processing facilities before vanishing back into the void. And every attack was more devastating than the last. Admiral Chen Wei commanded the fleet from the bridge of the Beijing, a ship named for a city that had been destroyed in the first week of the invasion and rebuilt by its people within 6 months. And she drove her crews with the same relentless determination that had kept humanity fighting when all hope seemed lost. "We do not have the numbers for a conventional war. She told her captains during their strategy sessions. So we will not fight a conventional war. We will fight the way our ancestors fought against larger enemies. With speed and surprise and absolute ruthlessness. The Concord commanders did not understand this kind of warfare, for they had grown accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with superior numbers and technology, and they could not adapt to an enemy that refused to stand and fight. The humans employed tactics that no Concord strategist had ever conceived. Attacking supply lines instead of fleets, targeting communications arrays instead of weapons platforms, and using psychological warfare that broke enemy morale without firing a single shot. They broadcast messages to the slave populations of every world they approached, speaking in languages the Concord had tried to erase, telling stories of a blue world that had refused to kneel and promising that freedom was coming for all who wanted it, and the slaves listened on world after world. Species that had been broken and subjugated for generations began to remember what it meant to hope. For if the humans could resist the Concord, then perhaps resistance was not as futile as their masters had claimed. Rebellions erupted across the empire, small at first but growing larger as news of human victories spread through whispered networks and hidden communications. And the Concord found itself fighting on 1,000 fronts at once. The humans did not try to hold territory or build an empire of their own, for they knew they did not have the resources for such ambitions. Instead, they simply destroyed everything that kept the Concord functioning and moved on to the next target. They are like a virus, one Concord admiral complained during an emergency council session. They infect the system, cause as much damage as possible, and then spread to the next one before we can respond. But it was not until the Battle of Vale Prime that the Concord truly understood what they were facing. Vale Prime was the Kethrani homeworld, the heart of the species that had started this war. And the humans attacked it with their entire fleet in an assault that military historians would study for centuries to come. High Commander Zorath led the defense, determined to redeem himself after his failures on Earth. And he assembled the largest fleet in Kethrani history to protect his people from the human vengeance. The battle lasted 3 days. The humans lost half their ships in the first assault, but they did not retreat. They simply adapted their tactics and came again and again and again, each attack probing for weaknesses and exploiting them without mercy. They used their dying ships as weapons, ramming them into Kethrani vessels with crews still aboard, choosing death over surrender in a display of suicidal determination that horrified their enemy. Zorath watched his fleet crumble around him and felt something he had never experienced in 300 years of service. The cold certainty that he was going to lose on the third day. The Beijing broke through the defensive line and inserted ground forces onto the planet's surface. And among the first soldiers to set foot on Kethrani soil was a unit of human marines who had lost their families in the invasion of Earth. They did not come for revenge, they came for justice. Zorath was captured during the ground assault, dragged from his command bunker by soldiers whose hatred he could feel like a physical force. And he expected to die slowly and painfully for everything his people had done to theirs. Instead, they brought him to a bare room and left him alone with a human general whose face bore the scars of 100. Battle General Sarah Mitchell sat across from him in silence for a long moment, studying him with eyes that had seen too much death to be surprised by anything anymore. "You called us primitive," she said finally, her voice calm despite everything. "Do you still believe that?" Zorath could not bring himself to answer, for he had no words that could possibly express the enormity of his species' miscalculation. "Your Concord has existed for 10,000 years," Mitchell continued. "In that time, you have enslaved or destroyed over 100 sentient species. You have built an empire on suffering, and you have forgotten what it means to struggle." She leaned forward, her gaze holding his, We never forgot, Commander. Our entire existence has been a struggle. Against our environment, against each other, against everything that tried to kill us. And we survived it all. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the burning city beyond. We are not going to exterminate your people, she said. That would make us no better than you, but we are going to make sure you never threaten anyone again. And then we are going to find every species your Concord has enslaved. Zorath found his voice at last, though it was barely a whisper. What will you do with them? Mitchell turned back to face him, and for just a moment her expression softened with something that might have been compassion. We will give them what you never gave us. Commander, we will give them a choice. And in that moment Zorath understood that the humans were not merely winning a war. They were building something new, something that would replace the Concord's empire of fear with something else entirely. They were building hope.